road. A limousine would pull out in front. Two big guys would come and carry my luggage down to the car. They'd carry me down to the car if I wanted to. Limo would drive me right. I live here in Sherman Oaks, and Limo would take us right over to Van Nuys Airport, the private jets, and we'd go right out on the tarmac. I'd get out. They'd load my luggage. I'd walk on the plane. The moment Frank put his foot on that plane, we took off down the runway. Boom. He had a pilot.
Wow.
Johnny Spots. He'd say, "Let's go, Spots," and we'd down the runway, and we'd squad cars and limousines. We'd land squad cars and limousines, rush us to the arena. We'd go on stage, do the show. Squad cars and limousines rush us back to the jet. We were flying over the venue. People weren't even in their cars yet. We were on our way to the next city, doing 5 or 6 cities or 7 in a row. Doing that and playing golf. Christopher Morley once said, "Success is living the life you want." I was on top of the world with that world. You know, that's what I miss. I miss that excitement.
Dystopia tonight. Dystopia tonight.
You said, "What's going on?" You just mentioned all the things I did in my career, and now your show, so it's all downhill from here.
This is how we let people know it's over. We invite them on here, and then right at the end of the show, we go, "And you're done. You're out of show business. Congratulations."
Pete, after this, what?
I love that we were talking about it backstage, but you have somewhere to go after this. You're the only guest we've had so far that is dressed this nicely on the show.
Yeah, I wanted to, compliment you and said that I told you that your manager told me that I had to wear a suit and tie if I was going to be on your show, but that's not true. I actually had an interview this afternoon on camera, and then also I'm leaving here and going to do a corporate date when I finish with your show, and then after that I'm going to have dinner, and then I'm going to go catch Frankie Avalon in Thousand Oaks. He's a buddy of mine, and of course,
beautiful.
They're performing at the Thousand Oaks Performing Arts Center tonight, and I've seen his show, and I've worked with him before, so it's a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun.
When you go to see shows like that, are you good at kind of not getting the itch to want to perform? Like, are you able to kind of detach yourself and go, "I'm here to see a friend perform. It's not about me, and I'm having a good time"? Or do you see a stage and a large group of people, and you're like, I gotta tell some jokes. I want to get on stage.
I have to be honest with you. That question has never been asked me in 50 years, and it's a very, very good question, because I've always said, believe this or not, I feel more comfortable on stage than I do sitting in an audience.
Right.
When the years I toured with Sinatra was 20,000 seat arenas, and in Hawaii 40,000, and just the excitement of that,
Yeah.
and yet I still feel more comfortable in the wings waiting to come out. When I sit in an audience, after a while, I get a little restless. In most shows should never last more than 90 minutes, to be honest with you. I mean, that's all the big stars I ever toured with. That's the way they wanted it. 90-minute show was more than enough for an audience.
Yeah.
If it was longer than that, then and I don't care who you are, they get a little bit restless.
I just learned the craziest fact about, and it's not something that I think I would have ever normally looked up, so I just stumbled upon it. The Beatles shows, when they were touring, when they were big, when they did live gigs, they were 25 minutes. They did 25 minutes on stage, and that was it. And I cannot believe that was all you got when you went to see, because McCartney now does like two and a half hours. Springsteen's like 4-hour shows. Like, comedians always do longer now, longer sets. But when you went to see a band like that back in the day, it was 25. Like, 90 seems fair. 90 seems like a perfect amount of time for an evening. But 25 minutes, biggest band in the world, that's crazy.
Yeah, I'm really surprised, because you just told me another thing I didn't know, that 25 minutes, I would have, they didn't do a whole lot of that. Now, prior to becoming big stars, they performed in clubs in Germany and England. They must have done hour shows there. But
yeah,
I would think 25 minutes for, although most of the fans who saw them in those days were probably passed out by the end of 20 minutes. High energy,
Yeah.
Hey, can you imagine having to open for them?
I know. Oh man, I that had to be the most daunting thing. I've opened. I feel like you've got guys like you who would open for singers and stuff like that. That's such a rare thing because it's not something that really I don't know why it stopped happening. I mean, when I started doing stand up, I opened for a couple bands, and then I think the last one I actually opened for, I did a music festival, and I was the only comedian there, and I opened for the Smithereens.
Mm.
And that was really cool, and I had known who they were and stuff like that, so it was a kind of a different experience. But it's not something that happens a lot. Was that? Do you feel comfortable doing that kind of thing to the point where, like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Years ago, if you would, when I started out in show business, there were no comedy clubs. There were none in America.
right,
And then 5 years later, there were 550 comedy clubs in America. It was a boom. But when I started out, we worked nightclubs. There were, all the nightclubs in America. As you pointed out, I was with a comedy team. Tim Reid and I were America's first black and white comedy team.
yeah,
History shows we were the last. There's never been one since. I wrote a book about that experience years ago in 2005 called Tim and Tom, an American comedy in black and white. But we worked in those days, all black clubs in the North and the South, what they affectionately called the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs.
right.
At 2 Grand in Detroit, that was where Motown was in Detroit at that time. So all the Motown acts would go to the 20 Grand nightclub to break in their act before they went to Vegas. OJ's, the Temptations, Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross and the Supremes, all those kind of acts would break in their act at the 20 Grand. And Tim and I would work there. We worked the Sugar Shack in Boston. We worked the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear, the Cotton Club, and we worked Club Harlem in Atlantic City before they had gambling. These were black-owned, black-operated nightclubs, and you would open for singing acts, And then finally, when the team split up and I went on to do the Tonight shows and everything, and I started working in Vegas, I opened for Sammy Davis Jr. I opened for Natalie Cole, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Don, James Zimmerman, Frankie Avalon. I opened again, Smokey Robinson, and then for Frank Sinatra, And he was a singer and a comic. If you went in the Strip in Las Vegas in those days, all along the left side for a mile and on the right side for a mile, on the marquees was a comedian and a singer, or a singer and a comedian. But that's what the show was. And they wanted a 90-minute show. The opening act would do 25 minutes, and the headliner would do 1 hour and 5, or you do 30 in an hour, something like that. But a 90-minute show.
Do you remember the first time you had opened for a singer? Do you remember the instruction or the advice they gave you as a comic having to go up there? Like, was it supportive of the comic, or was it like, hey, get in and get out, do your time, and it's not about you?
Depending on what singer you were with. Insecure singers might be worried that you're going to get a bigger reaction than them. But they also wanted you to get that audience up for them, because people were always still filing in while the show was starting. If they started on time, they would, you had to be the brunt of that. If it was a dinner room, where in the old days in Las Vegas, they served dinner, and so you had to fight that element, the waiters and the waitresses and all that stuff. But the more secure the star, when I took Sammy Davis Jr., he was so supportive. He so understood, because he had been an opening act a lot of this earlier part of his career.
Right.
So depending on who you're working with, those who were comfortable in their skin, and also Sammy Davis Jr. knew, Frank Sinatra knew, Dean Martin knew. They knew when they went out, they were going to get that crowd.
Right.
So they would, they were confident in their own skills. Insecure entertainers might, now what you going to do and what you going to say, and be careful about this, and I don't want you saying that, and
Right.
Yeah.
What was the bonding period like? I mean, when you were on the road with those guys, was it more like hanging out after the hotel? Did you guys have like a rapport immediately?
Depending on who the artist was, but by and large, I toured with Sammy Davis 3 years, and we remained friends till the day he died. I was at his funeral. I was at his private wake with only people. Smokey Robinson and I are still the best of friends. We play golf. We hang out together. I love him like a brother. We spend a lot of time together. Of course, Mac Davis, Frankie Avalon, I toured with Frankie. We were under contract at the Claridge Hotel. We've been friends for years. James and I have been friends for years. A lot of and then afterward, we'd hang out like buddies. Again, Frank Sinatra was like a father to me toward the end of my life.
Right.
he hung out till dawn every night. When you toured with Frank, he never went to bed till the sun came up, whether we were on the road or off the road. When I stayed at his home 6 times a year, he wanted me to ride around the desert with him all night long, or stay up with him, in some bar that they'd give him. Frank, there was a bar down there that would give Frank the keys, and they'd go home. A guy named Chaplin, Sidney Chaplin.
Wow.
He was Charlie Chaplin's son, and he owned
Oh my God.
So Mirage, and we would hang there till dawn. I'll tell you a quick funny story.
Yeah.
Frank would always lock the door. Of course, if a bartender stayed, and they loved to stay because Frank was a big tipper. But
Mm-hmm.
didn't. I was an ex-bartender, so I'd pour the drinks and make Frank a drink, and we stayed till the sun came up. One night, he forgot to lock the front door. The bar was closed. Sydney went home.
Uh-huh.
Talking to Frank like this, like I'm talking to you, but Frank's back was to the door, and I saw a station wagon pull up outside the door. There was a glass door you could see through, and I just figured they're going to try the door and it's locked. But he forgot to lock it, and a woman walked through the door, and she walked right up behind Frank Sinatra, and she said, excuse me, do they have a jukebox in here? And Sinatra turned around, and he looked her right in the face, and he said, I'm sorry, what did you say? She said, did they have a jukebox in here? And Frank looked around, he said, no. He said, I don't think so. And as a side, he said, I'll sing for you. She said, no, thanks. And she turned around and she walked out. And he watched her like a little boy. He was watching her like that. And I said to him, she obviously didn't recognize you. He said, maybe she did.
Oh my God. That's hilarious. So wait, so it was Charlie Chaplin's son that owned the place?
He did. His name was Sidney Chaplin. And he had been on Broadway and on what was it? Something. Oh, he had been in a Bye Bye Birdie. He was in a play, Bye Bye Birdie.
Yes.
He had made a little bit of money, and then whatever money he made, he opened up that bar down in the desert, and he loved it. And all bars love Frank because he was a huge tipper and spent it.
Sure. So the three of you guys, I mean, you, Frank Sinatra, and then Chaplin's son hanging out. I mean, did you guys, bug him for Chaplin stories? And did he bug you guys for stories about the road and stuff? Like, what's the conversation like in that room at night at a bar?
Sydney would go home, but nonetheless, I would bug him about his death. We had a real good relationship with him because he was like, I think not from the first marriage or something like that. He was like when Sydney married a younger woman, or something like that. I mean, I'm sorry, Charlie did. But on the road with Frank, if we were in Vegas, Tahoe, Reno, Atlantic City, or if we did one-nighters, we bolted out that same night to the next. Wow. But if we were in Vegas, Tahoe, Reno, Atlantic City, we'd hang out till dawn. After the shows, we would go sit in the back of some restaurant, and it would be Frank, and it would be Julie Rizzo and his bodyguard and stuff, and maybe a couple guys from the show. At his home was really exciting because when we stayed in Rancho Mirage, his house guest, he had a big compound down there where you had a private security gate to come in. And when you got on the compound, there was a main house where Frank stayed. But on the outer perimeters were bungalows. And they were called New York, New York, Strangers in the Night, Tender Trap, My Way, named after his songs.
Wow.
And house guests would be Gregory Peck and his wife, Veronique, Kirk Douglas and his wife, Ann, Jack Lemmon and his wife, Felicia, Sidney Poitier and his wife, Joanne. It would be Clint Eastwood and whoever he was dating at the time. It would be Robert Wagner, Joe St. John, Angie Dickinson. They would sit around till dawn, and the women would eventually go to bed, but the guys would stay up. And for me, because these were people I saw in the movies when I was a little boy growing up, I would sit up at that table, and I'd just be fascinated by their conversation, wishing I had a microphone there and a camera, because they would talk about films, To Kill a Mockingbird and Frank's films, From Here to Eternity, and etc. It was just fascinating to be around them.
Do you have like a particular story that you can remember that you cannot, don't say anything you can't actually repeat if you don't want to, but is there one particular story from somebody that got you, like, I cannot believe they're saying this out loud?
Time after time after time. Every night, John, what I would do, ever before I ever met Frank, Tim Reid and I first went into show business. I so loved show business. I never thought I would be in this business. I never thought I'd ever be a comedian. It was the furthest thing from my mind, even though I admired comedians my whole life. But I would go back to the room wherever I was. If something funny or poignant happened that night, I would journal it. I would write it down. And it's what my book is about. It's still standing. This was a conglomeration of all my notes that I took through the years. So I could tell you, and there's many stories in the book, but there's one story I won't tell you now because it's too long. But how Frank Sinatra saved Johnny Carson's life from a mob hit, and the only reason I told the story was Julie Rizzo told me verbatim what happened, and then Frank Sinatra told me exactly what Julie told me 3 weeks later, and I believe both of them how it happened. And the only reason I told the story was Johnny Carson's lawyer Henry Bushkin wrote a book later in life where he tried to take credit for saving Johnny's life from crazy Joey Gallo. But
oh my God,
story from Julie, I realized only one person could have saved Johnny's life at that time, and that was Frank Sinatra. It happened when Johnny was a new star in New York, when the Tonight Show was in New York, and it just started out there.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny was new, and he did a real dumb thing one night in Julie's bar to a girlfriend of Joey Gallo. And it's too long to explain now, but that story is one that I'll never forget because it'll make your hair stand on end. And
right.
And when you read the book, you got a lot of hair to be standing on end.
I've read that. I've read that excerpt from the book, man, and it is chilling and crazy. And that's one of those things. Their stories sound so. I mean, when you think about what's going on today and like kind of the celebrity culture we have, whatever, it does seem like there's no way this happened. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I love hearing from guys like you that it actually is true, and that's exactly how it went down.
You know what I know? One thing I knew about Frank Sinatra, he wasn't a big talker, but when we got alone, if Frank told you something, you could take it to the bank. And that Julie told me that story, and 3 weeks later, Frank told me it verbatim. Julie told me alone, as you read the book.
Mm-hmm.
But on the positive side of the many things, I mean, I'll tell you, one night I'm listening to all these people I just mentioned talk about film and directing. And I noticed that they were showing great reverence to Frank Sinatra. These actors, Gregory Peck, Jack Lemmon, Clint Eastwood was at the table that night. Robert Wagner, Kirk Douglas. That whenever Frank spoke, they showed a lot of reverence. And finally, I was curious because in Hollywood, I studied acting in Illinois, in Chicago, and also out here. But usually, comedians or actors out here, they'll tell you, if you mention acting, they'll tell you who they studied with, and of course, the bigger the name, the better it was. Whoever they studied with. So. I was curious when they were showing so much reverence to Frank. I said, Frank, did you study acting? I want to know who you studied with. I said, did you study acting? And Gregory Peck grabbed my arm hard. He said, acting lessons would have ruined him.
Wow.
He was a diamond in the rough you didn't fool with.
Right.
That he was a brilliant actor. Forget about the fact that acting, he danced with Gene Kelly, for God's sake.
Yeah.
He won the Academy Award and he didn't study acting. That's why I tell everybody what separated him from all the other singers. When you gave Frank Sinatra a song, to him it became a script. What did the writer feel the night the writer took pen in hand?
Wow.
Frank immersed himself in that lyric and become that lonely guy in the bar whose woman left him, and he's never going to find love again. And you felt that. Every lyric in there. He was. Charlton Heston once said to watch Frank Sinatra sing a song is like watching a 4-minute movie, or like a film.
Yeah.
And the joy of a song.
Yeah, my grandfather was the one who got me into Frank Sinatra. I mean, he had every album, every CD when it came. After that, he always upgraded his collection, always was on top of what he was doing. I mean, I think to this day, my grandfather passed away a while ago, but I still have his number in my phone. Strangers in the Night is what he would, I think what we all had set to him when he would call. And it's just, I watched every tape that Frank Sinatra had, every roast, every movie he was in. It's just a huge part. Even my dad's side of the family, same thing. It was always just like a staple. It was like they knew him just because of how passionate he was when he was singing and when he was on stage and how he connected with his audience.
He was singing to you in front of 20,000 people, John. 20,000 people. And he'd start to sing and he'd bring it all down to here. That guy in the furthest seat up in that arena felt like he was in a bar with Frank and Frank was singing to him.
Right.
He had that incredible ability. The young entertainers today, they try to excite audiences with a lot of technical stuff, laser lights and things like that. Sinatra was a laser light. Sammy Davis Jr. was a laser light. They when you said Strangers in the Night, it's another story that's in the book, but it's a true story. One night, I'm riding around with Frank in the book. In the desert, and I put it in the book that we were talking, and he told me something very personal. Something really personal. And we were driving, coming towards his compound, And he said to me, I shouldn't have told you that. And I said, well, it won't go any further than this car. He said, I know, but I shouldn't have told you that. I said, well, again, it's not going any further than this car. And it's not like we're strangers.
Mhm.
And I don't know what made me do it, but I looked at him and I said, strangers in the night, big glances. He said, for God's sake, if you're going to sing that song, get in key. So he started going, strangers in the night. I said, exchanging glances. He said, wandering in the night. I said, and we were doing this song back and forth. Now we pulled in the compound, and he always hit me on the cheek. Good night, Tom.
Yeah.
He goes to his house, and I go to bungalow. And I'm thinking, if I went back to my bungalow, and if I went back to my old neighborhood, all the guys in the bar, and I said, you know what I was doing? I was just riding around with Frank Sinatra, and we were singing "Strangers in the Night." They'd say, "Get the fuck out of here," you know. But it happened,
Right?
And I'll never forget it. It was a moment, many moments with him that I'll never forget. But that was another one.
That's beautiful, man. When you're doing stand-up and you're opening for Smokey Robinson, you're opening for Frank Sinatra, all those different audiences. As a comedian, are you switching material up based on who you're opening for? Do you have a set that you know kills no matter what in front of a musician, in front of an audience at your time, or are you going with the flow and seeing what the audience is like each time you go out?
You know what? Here's the thing. Excuse me. When I was touring with Smokey or Sammy, I was doing the Tonight shows. I ended up doing 61 appearances on the Tonight Show. Every time you did the Tonight Show, you had to come up with a new 6 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the habit of always writing new material.
Right.
Some current material, but always new material. So, and that's one of the reasons Frank wanted me to tour with him, because he wanted to use a younger comedian at that time. I was a young guy, and because we were going to the same cities every year, and we're returning to Vegas and Tahoe and Reno and everything. So I was always writing new material. But I stayed true to me. What I felt as a stand-up comedian that I wanted to do. I didn't patronize an audience, However, I worked all Jewish audiences in my life, and I have a lot of material from growing up. I caddied at an all-Jewish country club.
Right.
I'm Irish Italian, but I had material about caddying at a club. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood because my family we were very poor. We had 8 kids, lived in a shack. So I shined in taverns with the black kids that I grew up with. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime, and I sold newspapers on the corner. And I played basketball on an all-black basketball team and football. So what I did, I have an album out in front of an all-black audience called "That White Boy's Crazy."
Right.
I'm the only white comedian ever doing
Great album.
But it was because I could adapt, to whatever audience. And when I work all Italian audiences, that's a killer because it's so much fun. You can do stuff about Italian and so on and so on. But that part I would do, but not the whole act. You know what I mean?
Right.
One of the greatest lines whenever I talk to young comedians, and I'm not including you in this because you're a professional. I mean, you've been
Yeah.
well, when I'm talking to newcomers and they'll ask me for advice, I'll say, Candid Camera had the greatest line of them all. Caught in the act of being yourself. That was one of their leads. And hey, we're doing a show tonight and you're going to caught in the act of being yourself. I said, when you become a comedian on stage, most all of us start out emulating another comedian, doing an impression of another comedian because we know that worked. And so you're doing whatever. I can look at a new kid and on a Monday night or a guy or a girl, but I can tell who maybe their favorite is, if it's Seinfeld or Chris Rock or whoever. But when you start out, we do that. We emulate another comedian because we knew that worked. One night, you let a little bit of you out when you're new. If it doesn't get a laugh, you pull back in and you start doing that impression of the comedian again. But one night, you say something, ad lib or something yourself, and it gets a laugh. And next night, you let a little bit more of you out, a little bit more. And pretty soon, you become you on the stage. And that's when you arrive. That's when you start to really grow. When you're so comfortable in being, John Poveromo or Tom Dreesen, I earlier in my career, I realized that, and I started to become very comfortable just being me on stage with whatever audience I was in front of.
Yeah, that's the greatest. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's a great way to put it, but that is the greatest feeling in the world when you hit it, when you're on stage and it happens. Do you remember the first time it happened to you when you were on stage?
You mean when I scored doing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it happened, one night. Well, first of all, when I was with Tim Reid, I was a comedy team, and so I had to be a always aware of my comedy partner and our timing and everything. And I played characters inside of our roles, you know. But when I went off alone, and when the team split up and I went off alone, I remember one specific night that they asked me to do the church that I went to back in Harvey, Illinois. They asked me to, there was a charity thing. They wanted me to MC and raise some money for them. And I just wrote a bunch of material about going to that school. And that night I just, because I had a built-in audience, they went to that school too. And all I did was be me. I wasn't doing anything else. And I walked out and I said, this is what I want to be. This is what I want to do. I want to be me. I want to be, it was such a great feeling that I didn't have to put on an act,
right,
to do this. I just had to be me, you know. Again, caught in the act of being yourself.
That's great, man. When you were touring with Tim Reid, were you guys, and like, were you ever felt like you were in danger?
Did I ever feel that way? And the fourth time on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face and then tried to beat the hell out of me.
Holy shit.
I boxed when I was in the Navy, but this guy outweighed me for like 100 pounds. You know, he pummeled me, and we rolled all over tables and chairs. I mean, you know, you got to remember 1969 when we went on stage. Let me give you the backdrop. Robert Kennedy was just assassinated. Martin Luther King was just assassinated a couple of years before. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. So this is 69. We were 5 years removed from that. People weren't integrating, you know, there were still all black clubs and all white clubs, even though they could by law. They still weren't doing it in a lot of places in the South we went and in the North. And here we were going across the land, just trying to make people laugh. In those days, you didn't see a black guy and a white guy walking down the street together, let alone on a stage together.
Right.
You know, so anywhere there was racial tension, we would go. We did 11 prisons in 1 year. We did the county jail in Chicago 3 times, the county jail. Anywhere there was racial tension, we would go there. The interesting thing about racism in those days, John, if we worked in our black club and there was a black guy who hated white people, hated them with passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me.
Wow.
See, he was a racist redneck white guy who hated people with a passion. He wasn't mad at Tim. He was mad at me for being with Tim.
Wow.
So that was a kind of insanity. Now, it wasn't a lot. We scored. We did well. You know, but there was that one little tiny element that was there in those days. You know, that you know, when we walked out on stage in a place, you know, people be talking, and all of a sudden you go, what's this all about? You know, that guy and a white guy. You know,
what was the thing that kept you guys going?
Well, first of all, you know, we love what we were doing. We really, and I can't tell you how many times in our career, and Tim will tell you the same thing. This means more to me than anything in all the years we toured together. I can't tell you how many times after a show at a college, high school, and even in a prison, you know, where a white guy would come up and say, you know, I got a black friend that I'd like to reach out to, but if I do, the white guys are going to wear me out. But after watching you and Tim tonight, I'm going to reach out to my black friend. Then a black kid would come up and say to us, you know, I got a white friend that I really like, but if I do, the brothers are going to call me in. But after watching you and Tim, I'm going to reach out to my white friend. That meant more to us than anything in the world. We weren't preaching. We were just having fun on stage.
Yeah.
But see, all over America in those days, and listen what I'm talking about. When I finish, you'll say the same shit is happening today. All over America in those days, people were saying, you know, we need more discourse among the races. You know, we need more discourse. We need better race relations. Well, when you watch Tim and Tom, guess what we were having? A race relation. We were having a discourse that America wasn't having.
Right.
Fun. Again, we weren't preaching. We weren't trying to hammer people over the head. We were having fun together. We were friends, and you could tell that. You know, love for one another. You could tell that. You know, Jerry Lewis told me something very interesting one time. He said when him and Dean started out, he said they love one another. He said, and the audience sensed that we love one another. And he said they also sensed when we didn't love one another.
Wow. Yeah.
Interesting, huh?
That is interesting. Yeah. That's a good point though, too, because you could feel even when I was a kid, when I would watch it towards the end of their like run together, it seemed like something was kind of off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's weird. Even Abbott and Costello too. Like, I feel like the later movies and stuff like that, like there was a missing chemistry or a missing piece. Something didn't seem like,
You're right. Yeah. When it isn't then it becomes an act.
Yes.
Again, another thing I tell young comedians, I say, if you never forget anything else I say, remember this: it's a conversation, not a presentation. Is it your?
Right.
You damn right it's your act. It's your job to make it look like it's not an act.
Right.
It's a conversation, not a presentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you have any other when you were a kid? Was comedy and that performing always your passion, or did you want to be something else initially?
I never ever thought of ever being in show business. I grew up so poor, it's the furthest thing from my mind. However, we didn't have a television in the shack that I lived in. Everybody else didn't have a TV. We had an old radio, and I used to listen to Bob Hope, Jack Benny on the radio.
Mhm.
And there was another show, Can You Top This? It was 4 or 5 comedians sitting around, and they'd throw a subject out, and they all had a joke on that subject. It's a gas station, and they'd do gas station jokes.
Nice.
But I found that fascinating. However, I also shined shoes in all the taverns in my neighborhood, excuse me, to help feed my brothers and sisters. One of the taverns I shined shoes in, there was 36 taverns in Harvey, Illinois, a suburb on the south side of Chicago.
Wow.
36 taverns in my hometown, but there were 8 in my neighborhood. And so I would shine shoes in all the bars in my neighborhood. And the last one I went to was Frank Polizzi owned the bar. My mother's brother-in-law, her sister's husband, and he owned the bar. My mother was a bartender there. So I'd go to his bar last to wait for the shifts to change in the factory, and then I'd go back out to the bars again. But while I was sitting there waiting there, my mother, of course, was there. Frank Polizzi told jokes behind the bar, and it fascinated me that this guy, with his vocabulary, was his vernacular, could cause this sound. He'd hit that punchline and cause this sound to come out of everybody's body that filled the room like electricity and united everybody. I thought it was so cool that I would memorize his jokes, and I'd tell them at school, many that should not be told on a great Catholic school playground, But
Did your family kind of take to it when you told them you wanted to be a comedian? Did you even tell them, or did you just start doing it and then you kind of, when you made your money, told them?
I was married and had 3 kids. I came out of the service after 4 years. I was working on the loading dock. I was a Teamster. I got my union card, and I became foreman of the Teamsters that I used to work with. I was a photographer. I was a private detective. I was a bartender. I went from job to job. I sold life insurance. I went from job to job, never feeling fulfilled. I'd be in a bar with my buddies at 1 o'clock in the morning saying, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belonged. And I'm being honest. I used to pray. I used to say, God, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? This can't be it. I felt so unfulfilled. And I'd pray. I joined a civic group called the JCs, the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And they did civic projects. They helped, whatever problems were in the community, they would go work on that problem and try to solve that problem for the community. But in doing so, you receive leadership training. You learn how to serve on a committee, chair a committee. You learn Robert's Rules of Order, how to conduct meetings, so forth and so on. And anyhow, but I just want to digress. I still MC many major functions today, for corporations. A lot of it is I'm a good MC because of my training with the JCs, Robert's Rules of Order, how to conduct meetings. I know how to keep the program moving with continuity. Right. But anyhow, and one of the biggest problems in our community then was our youth using drugs. So I wrote a drug education program teaching elementary school children, 8th graders, the ills of drug abuse with humor. I would get the kids laughing. The program was to get the kids laughing and play some music. And once we calmed them down, got their attention, plant the seeds of the ills of drug abuse.
Nice.
On the first day, and again, I'll digress, I was praying. What is I'm supposed to be doing? The first day I proposed this project to the JC so that they would sanction it as a JC project. At a meeting, I had to propose it. A young black guy, Tim Reid, had just chapter. E.I. DuPont recruited him out of Norfolk State College in Chicago to work for E.I. DuPont. So he joined the JCs. He came up and he said, I'd like to help you with that project. I said, gee, I'm sorry. I already have a guy, a friend of mine, a white guy named John DeBoer, was my buddy, and he was going to help me. The next morning, and I told Tim, I'm sorry, I got a guy. The next morning, as fate would have it, or my prayer was answered, John DeBoer called me and said, I got a new job, Tom. I can't help you with that project. I said, gee, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reid. He joins me. We worked on the project, worked on it. We went into the school system. we'd make the kids laugh and everything. The program became #1 in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries. JCs used it through their publications as a model program on how to teach drug education at an 8th grade level. They weren't teaching in those days at a college or a high school level, let alone at an 8th grade level. But I went to them before they went to high school. Anyhow, one day, a little 8th grade girl leaving the classroom looked at Tim and I and said, "You guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team." And the thought of a white comedy team intrigued us because no one had ever done that before.
Right.
Writing material, what we thought was funny, and then we went into some clubs. There were no comedy clubs in those days. Mm-hmm. So we went into some clubs and we finally started going good. And like I told you, on a place called the Golden Horseshoe in Chicago Heights, Illinois, on the 4th show, a drunken redneck, tried to beat the hell out of both of us.
Jesus.
At University of Illinois, one time, a guy went outside in the snow and packed an ice ball and hit me right in the face with it.
Holy shit!
Smacked me in the face, and I went.
And Chappelle is complaining about getting tackled at the Hollywood Bowl. Come on. Well, have you called him? Have you talked to him about that?
Well, but I'd like to tell him I've been there, done that. But I'm a street guy. I don't have a degree from academia. I got a doctorate from the street. I grew up on the streets. I was a high school dropout. I went in at 17. I got a high school diploma from the Navy. Then I went to junior college nights studying political science and stuff like that. And wandering aimlessly, but I'm a street guy, and I've got a degree in common sense. But as a street guy, I had a lot of fights growing up. I had my nose broke twice. I'm not bragging about these things, but that's how you reacted where I grew up at. I grew up in a neighborhood where if you were in a bar and you were arguing about the Cubs and the White Sox, the other guy might say outside. That was a word in my neighborhood. Outside. That meant you were in the parking lot. They'd fight over Cub and White Sox games, But when this guy hit me in the face with that ice ball, and I realized Tim didn't even realize what happened. I first said, "Pow!" It hit me, And at first I thought somebody hit me with a bottle because my face was wet. I thought it was blood.
Right.
When I realized what happened, we're in the dark. I couldn't see the audience. I went berserk. I called this guy every name in the book, and I kept screaming, "Turn the lights on! I want to see you, chicken shit, son of a bitch! Show me who you are. Where are you?" I'm cursing, calling now the audience thought it was a bit. Guys and MFs and others. I've got every name I could think of. Tim thought I lost my mind because he realized at first what happened to me.
Right.
And of course we couldn't get the show back after that.
Oh my God.
Tim said to me, and we were relatively new. He said, "You got to be a little more professional, Tom. You got to be a little more." I said, "Tim, that snowball came from you. You work to my right all the time. That snowball came from that side." Right. I said, "I think that guy was aiming at you." But he went upstage on me just for a second for this bit we're doing and hit me. Tim said, "We should have killed that guy."
Oh man! When you guys wound up breaking up, he went on to do WKRP, and then you went to just do straight stand up at that point. Had you been preparing your own material like a stand up act? How did you reform the comedy duo thing to then go do the Tonight Show and then go do that kind of stuff, Match Game and your own solo stuff?
I thought it was over. I really thought it was over when the team split up. My ex-wife, I forgot her name. Oh yeah, Plaintiff. She wanted me out of show business, and I don't blame her. She didn't marry a comedian. She married a working guy. I was in the military. Came out. Her father worked in a factory for almost 40 years. Never missed a day. A check was there every Friday. You know how comedy is when you first start. There's no money. And for me to go in such a precarious business with a wife and 3 kids, and Tim had a wife and 2 kids.
Right.
Again, there were no comedy clubs. So she wanted me out of the business. So finally, after 6 years with Tim, she thought it's over now. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in a bar one night thinking, what the hell am I going to do? What am I going to do? I didn't want to leave show business. I was always very good in my life at alternatives. When I get my back against the wall, I don't give up. I say, okay, there's got to be a way. There's got to be an answer, a solution to this problem. So I was sitting at this bar, and they were closing the bar. My buddy named Jimmy Lepore, he owned a bar called the Soaky Inn, and I used to attend bar there, and I was a bouncer there at one time too, as a little guy. But we had some things to break fights up when they started in the bar. So
right.
Anyhow, but I was sitting at that bar, and they were closing up, and I had 2 beers in front of me. And a couple guys had bought a drink. When you got too many drinks in front of you, they give you a little shot glass and set it upside down. That means you got one more coming. I'm sitting there drinking this beer, with 2 beers in front of me. I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I could either find another black guy and continue what we were doing.
Right.
I could quit this business and make my wife happy, get out of show business, or I could go it alone. And I sat there and I said, I'm going to go it alone. And I had done this emceeing, in a couple of times for charities where I did some stand up alone. I didn't have a lot of material at the time, but I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go it alone. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get them. And I started thinking, I always set goals. I said, my ultimate goal will be get to the Tonight Show. In those days, in 1975, wherever you went in America, say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. The next question out of their mouth was, oh, yeah? You ever been on Johnny Carson? If you hadn't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you weren't a comedian. One appearance on that show, 27 million people watch that show. One appearance on that show, Freddie Prinze got a sitcom the next day.
Yeah.
One appearance and your life changed. So I said, okay, that's my goal. I want to be on the Tonight Show. And I remember a book I read by Clement Stone, Positive Mental Attitude. It said, if you know what you want to do in life, and if it's a noble endeavor, search your life and see if there's anything in your life that can deter you from that noble achievement. And I thought, what could stop me if I wanted to make it? And I said, drinking. I love to drink. I love to drink with the guys and hang out. I'm a neighborhood guy. I love to drink. I said, that could stop me, waking up with hangovers and everything.
Yeah.
And I pushed the 2 beers across the bar. And my buddy Jimmy came up, the bartender. He said, you're through for the night, Tommy? I said, I quit, Jimmy. He said, you're through for the night. I said, I quit, Jimmy. He said, I said, I quit drinking. He said, yeah, right. I'll see you tomorrow night. I never stopped drinking from that moment on. And I worked and worked and worked on my act. And I came out to the West Coast and I left my wife and 3 kids back there. She wrote me a Dear John while I was there. I was house sitting a house for a little while. Then I couldn't even sit there. And I got this letter. She wrote me a Dear John. Then I got kicked out of doing that. I couldn't stay at that home anymore that I was house sitting. I ended up sleeping in an old Nash Rambler that was up on blocks in the alley of this person's house that I was house sitting. And I stayed in that car. The front seat came down, so I used it as a bed. And I hitched up and down Sunset Boulevard every night, begging to work for free at the Comedy Store.
Who was when you worked at the Comedy Store, who was your crew? Did you have like a bunch of comedian friends and people that you kind of went around with?
Stage every night. I was going on stage at the Comedy Store with all these unknown comedians. David Letterman, Jay Leno, Robin Williams, Gallagher, Michael Keaton. The girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger.
Oh my God.
I would go on stage with Elayne Boosler. They were, I had a little more experience than some of them because I'd been in the business a little bit while. And I was the first one to break out and do the Tonight Show, before David and before Jay and then, but I hung, David and I are still the best of friends. Jay, I see all the time, and David and I played basketball together. We played racquetball together. We hang together even to this day. I love him dearly, and I know he'd do anything for me, and I do anything for him.
That's really sweet, man. That's good that you still have those friendships because I remember there's a bunch of comedy books. I was such a comedy nerd when I was a kid. I would come up and I had all of them. I had a Comics Life. I had Franklin Ajay's book, Comic Insights, all the ones that came out. There was one I can't remember exactly. It followed around Richard Lewis. I can't remember. I think it was Standing Up or whatever.
It's called I'm Dying Up Here.
I'm Dying Up Here. That's I've got that book too. Richard
Needles. Richard Needles. He wrote for the LA Times.
Great guy.
One of the critics wrote in New York. He said, "You open that book, because on the cover of that book was Robin Williams, Andy Kaufman, Richard Lewis, and I think Letterman and Leno or something." And the guy said, "You open that book for Letterman and Leno, but you leave with Tom Dreesen," because that book was really more about me than it was about any of those guys.
Absolutely. What was you were part of the Comedy Store strike. How were you close? Were you really close to Mitzi? Was that a painful kind of situation to go through?
It was, because I love Mitzi. She was good to me. She, and when, hey, by the way, when I came out here, the Comedy Store was the only game in town. There was no improvisation or Laugh Factory. Right. It was the only game in town. So your audition for Mitzi, if you're going to get to the Tonight Show, that's where they came. All the talent coordinators came to the Comedy Store.
Yeah.
Johnny Carson, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Dinah Shore, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand, all those shows and sitcoms for the talent people came there. So every night somebody was getting discovered there. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't get on at the Comedy Store, it's back to Toledo, pal. It's back to Harvey, Illinois. So the audition for Mitzi was more pressure than anything you could imagine, because if she didn't like you, it's over. So when I auditioned for her, I had worked in the past, and she could see I had stage presence, everything. So she gave me a time slot, and I became a regular after a while. So I thought the world of her. So meanwhile, I worked there for almost a year. I lobbied all the shows. I finally got the Tonight Show to come and see me. And then I got my first appearance on the Tonight Show. My whole world changed. And now I'm working Vegas, Tahoe, Reno, Atlantic City. I'm touring with Sammy Davis Jr. at that time. And every weekend I'd come home, I'd go to the Comedy Store to try out new material.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I was doing the Tonight Shows too, and I was doing all these other shows, So I would always work on new material. I'd come home and I'd sign up on, even when I was at Caesar's Palace or wherever I was at. Hey, I'm coming home, put me on the schedule this weekend. Anyhow, every time you'd go there, we worked in the original room, which is about 20 seats, small room, as you know.
Right.
That's where we went. Mitzi bought that, by the way, the Comedy Store, for people listening who don't know, many years ago, it was Ciro's, Ciros, a famous nightclub where all the stars performed there.
Right.
In that building. Well, Mitzi owned a little corner of it. Well, she bought the other guy out, and on the other side was the main room where they used to perform, 400-seater. Well, she put Jackie Mason there, Rodney Dangerfield. They got the door. She took the drinks and the food.
Right.
She charged $40 at the door, or $20 at the door, whatever you charge a person. That all went to the entertainer, and she took the drinks and food. One night, I come back. I think I'm going to the original room. I come off the road. They said, "Oh, you're in the main room, Tom." I said, "The main room? What?" Well, I go in the main room. It's David Letterman, Robin Williams, Gallagher, me, Michael Keaton. It's Elayne Boosler, Jay Leno. When I go on stage, I go, "Holy cow! I feel like I'm back in Vegas with this big room." But I wasn't. Right. But afterward, we all go to Cantor's, a restaurant on Fairfax Avenue. We'd all hang out till dawn. And in comes Jay, and he's saying, "Hey, this is bullshit, man. I mean, she pays those other guys. Now, maybe it took 5 or 6 of us to fill that room, but we still filled the room."
Yeah.
You start talking about this, and they wanted to get a meeting. When I go to the meeting with my buddies, I'm making money. I'm on the road. I'm doing great. But these are my friends. So I go, and they were in utter chaos. You ever get 60, 80, 100 comedians in a room? Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Come up with the conclusion is we should have another meeting. The second meeting, it was even more chaos. And finally, I got up on stage because of my JC background, and I said, "Whoa, let me. I'll conduct the meeting. I'll get them organized. Quiet down. Hold on, Gallagher. Hold on. Jay's got the floor. Hold on, Jay. To make your point. Put it in the form of a motion." I said, development committees, subcommittees, and got them organized. And when you got them organized, they were a force to be reckoned with. These were some bright minds.
Yeah.
And then so finally, I became like the spokesman. But I wish the hell I wouldn't have been. The last thing I wanted to be. I looked like Jimmy Hoffa there for a while. But we go back to Mitzi, because I knew Mitzi and I liked Mitzi, and I had a great relationship with her. And I'd sit down with her and say, "Mitzi, got to pay the comics. Can you pay the comic?" "No, they don't deserve to be paid. They don't."
Wow.
Finally, one night, the comics are talking about going on strike, and this is getting really hot and heavy. And one night, I'm laying in bed, and I jumped out of bed. I was married at the time. I said to my wife, I scared the hell out of her. She said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I got it. Why didn't I think of this? I got it." I went in the next morning. I waited for Mitzi to come in. I said, "Mitzi, you're charging $5 at the door. Charge $6. Let the comedians have that $1. Charge $6. Let them have that $1. If 100 people show up, they spend $100 for the night. If 200 people show up, they spend $200." She said, "No, they don't deserve to be paid." And that rocked my world, because I thought it was about money.
Right.
It was about money. We could resolve this issue. It was about control. And she didn't want to pay the comedians. And anyhow, it became an 8-week strike. The comics voted to go on strike. I was on. And then they also voted, rather than have 6 comedians talking to the media there, let one comedian do it, or we're going to diffuse our message here or something. So they said, "Oh, let Tom do it." And again, I regret that, because I became the face of this. And then because I'm part Italian, I even had a guy try to connect me with the mob in Chicago.
Holy shit.
On that line, John. He said, weren't you a Teamster? I said, "Yeah, I worked on a loading dock." "Yeah." He said, "Now, weren't you a member of the Teamster?" I said, "Well, yeah, I was, but I had when you worked 30 days on the loading dock, you became an automatic Teamster, whether you liked it or not." And after 6 months, I had to drop my card to become management.
Wow.
But I knew a lot about arbitration and things like that. So, long story short, it became a real burden on me. For 8 weeks, I had 6 gigs with Sammy Davis Jr. It came to $50,000. In those days, was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I had to call Sammy and said, "Sammy, I'm in a fight, and I've been this way ever since I was a kid. If I get in a fight, I want to win. I don't care if it's basketball, baseball, pool, whatever.
Mhm.
I want to win." And he said, "I understand, Tommy, and don't worry about it. When this is over, you're doing the right thing. You can come back on the road with me." And it lasted 8 weeks, and
Wow.
it was. And I'm believe it or not, it's for 40 years I never went back to the Comedy Store because Steve Lebeckon committed suicide not long afterward, as you know, and it broke my heart. It crushed me.
Yeah.
And so I just never went back. But now they did the documentary on the Comedy Store, and Mike Binder called me, and Peter Shore, Mitchie's son, asked me if I would do the documentary and would I come back. So I've been going back now, and I on the road, when I come to the road, I go work the main room, and it's really kind of nostalgic.
I was going to ask, yeah, because I first of all, I love that documentary. That we had Mike Binder on the show recently, but when that documentary came out, I thought it was an important time for it to come out because it was right, I think, probably in the middle of COVID or when we were still locked down. I know that, and nobody was performing anymore. But I loved seeing in that documentary the Comedy Store through the decades and the entire store and comedians and kind of the way we do business go from comedy's amazing to comedy's over, comedy's amazing to the store is going to close, you know what I mean? Like, and then through all those decades, it went through this cycle. That made me feel like even through COVID, comedy's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And we were going to be able to come back from it. Was it when you first stepped in, when you were doing that documentary, when you first stepped into the store, how much time did you take, man? Did you get to walk around a little bit and kind of be back in there for the first time? And like, how did it hit you?
It really, Mike Binder filmed me. If you remember, he took me in a car and they filmed me driving down Sunset Strip to come back to the Comedy Store.
Yeah.
Mike showed me around. And it was kind of bittersweet because all these memories came flooding back, of those days of struggle, of those, when I walked off stage one night at the Comedy Store and out in the parking lot was this kid with a beard and he had an old beat up red pickup truck. He just drove in from Indianapolis. And he said, "Gee, you really did a good show, Mr. Dreesen." I said, "Thank you. What is your name?" He said, "Dave Letterman. I'm from Indianapolis." And we started talking and became friends. I mean, all that memory came back. And not only that, where Steve Lebeckon, when he jumped off the top of the Continental Hyatt House where he landed, he dove toward the Comedy. So, I mean, that hit me hard. The whole thing. But I went on stage and the audience, was great. It made me, it calmed me a little bit, but it was kind of a strange feeling, that hard to describe because it's a different, I'm sure they bond today, but we had a strong bond among the group that we were with and it continues to this day. And I didn't know, but I have to say a lot of the young comedians came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're back." It made me feel comfortable too.
Oh, that's awesome, man. The bond that you guys have, I mean, again, like I used to be such a comedy nerd. I still am, but like I read all the books, stuff like that. I feel like, yeah, there's a definite bond today. And I think maybe it was still stronger back then because a lot of you guys did move out west. You know what I mean? Like you literally left everything you knew behind. And then what you had in common was comedy. There wasn't any social media. So you had that circle, you guys were out you were the only ones who understood each other. You were hanging out late at diners. If you had families, if you didn't have families, you guys were each other's support system. So that I think is probably where that much stronger bond came from than probably what we have today.
Well, and also too, you remember, here's an interesting thing that I'll say. In those days, as I'm not repeating what I said before, it sounds like it, but a person would come and say, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" You'd say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." They'd go, "Wow, Martha, honey, come here. Honey, come here. He's a stand-up comedian, honey. He's a stand-up comedian." You know what they say today? So, "What do you do for a living?" They say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." "So's my dentist. My dentist does it on weekends."
That's so fucking true, dude.
Yeah, my wife's gynecologist. She's a comedian too. I mean, everybody's a comedian today.
I know, man. It's one of those things. It's funny because people do the same thing where like I'll say I'm a comedian and then they'll go to follow me on social media and they'll be like, oh, we didn't know you were serious because I've got, like they'll actually see like a body of work and who I've been, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I was serious about it or whatever. Or they'll just laugh. And I was in the hospital like a few months ago, not to brag, but I wound up in the hospital. I wasn't feeling that great. But they were like, what do you do? And I had to, I said, I'm a comedian. And then they were like, oh, okay, we get it. And then they literally just wrote unemployed. And I was like, that works too, actually. I was like, that's fair enough too. But then the guy, like the doctor came in and was like, we actually have to put something down. And I was like, I'm a comedian. And they're like, oh, really? Like, then they got excited. But I was like, could you also just help me? I feel like shit. It was just weird, man. But it's so funny the way they react.
Yeah. Well, again, it was such a, and again, there were no comedy clubs. So once you got 550 comedy clubs in America, there were 3 in Tulsa, Oklahoma at one time.
Yeah.
You got to fill those slots. You got to put inventory in there. You have a MC, an opener, a middle, and a closer. And then maybe the same thing for the second show or something. You got to fill those with it. So that brought a lot of mediocrity in the stand-up comedy, but it also helped develop a lot of great comedians that are here today.
Yeah.
And what you talked about, we had to come here, period. If you didn't make, or stay in New York, but usually even in New York, comics came out here. We had to come out here because that's where the Tonight Show was. And there was a stairway to stardom in comedy. If you got to the Tonight Show, there was a stairway. Today, there's a comedy club in your hometown, or there's 6 or 7 in the area that you might develop in, and also social media. I mean, Dane Cook, to his credit, he didn't do like hit the Tonight Show. He went to what was it?
MySpace.
And developed all this following. He was filling 15,000 seat arenas from doing the social media.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is that I don't think enough people learned from that was that you can do that if you have the material to back it up.
Yeah.
You can. I mean, I've seen people get like pretty popular on like a TikTok thing or whatever, and then go to do. I saw one guy go on AGT, and it's fine. You can be funny for 3 minutes on America's Got Talent and be kind of cute and do whatever. But when you got to headline a show, it's not going to cut it.
Amen.
And it's kind of funny to watch. I remember opening for him. Great guy, nice guy. But I remember he was on AGT. He got really big on there. All the AGT crowd came out, and he had a headline and then a show. And he wound up doing 20 minutes. And then the rest of the time just kind of meandering and apologizing for not having, the rest of the time to do it. But the funny thing is that crowd was still so forgiving. Like after he would get off, they would still line up to take his picture. And I was like, if I could just get to that level of mediocrity, if I could just get my, I got to ask, because I could see it sitting on your desk, man. You got an Emmy sitting on your desk. What is that Emmy from?
I did I produced and performed in actually in Chicago, in a commercial, a PSA, a public service announcement for the 100 Club. It was whenever a first responder is killed in the line of duty, they're killed in the line of duty, that they come to your home and they take care of your children's college. Excuse me, they pay off your mortgage, and they give you money to help the widow or the widower, to survive. Now, the reason what happened was I was out here actually getting a haircut, and a guy from Chicago called me. He used to be the head of CBS and the head of NBC at one time. I'm sorry, ABC. And he later became president of the 100 Club. And he said, Tom, we're trying to put together a PSA. Can you help me? I said, and he told me about it. I said, I'll call you back in an hour. And this is a true story, John. I called him back in an hour. I said, I got Dennis Farina, God rest his soul.
Oh,
I got Hans. I got Gary Sinise. I got William Peterson. And I got Joe Mantegna. Excuse me.
What a lineup.
And we're going to do this PSA for you. And they all came in from different parts of the country. We put it together and it won an Emmy. And
wow.
I produced it,
That's fantastic, man. I love it. Anytime you're on TV or you're doing movies, stuff like that is fantastic. I got to ask you a little bit about, because I feel like most people don't even realize this, but you were in Spaceballs, which is one of my all-time favorite. I know you're like, what was it? What was it like working with Mel, though? How'd you wind up with that gig?
You want to hear how I wound up with that gig? Show you
absolutely
all the acting classes I took and all that. Here's how I got the gig.
Right.
I was in a bar. I just got divorced, and I was in a bar with this hot, tall chick. Her name was Trish. She was smoking hot. Mm-hmm. And it was our first date. And I took her out to Santa Monica, At that time, they had an improvisation in Santa Monica, and I was going to go over and do a set there, but take her to dinner first. So I'm in the bar, and our table wasn't ready, so we went to the bar, and I sat down. She stood up. Mel happened to be in the restaurant, and he sees this smoking hot chick, and so he walks all the way around the bar, like he's going to the men's room, and he sees me. He says, "Hey, Dreesen, how you doing?" I saw him, Mel. I had met him a couple of times before. I said, "Hey, Mel, how you doing?" He said, "I'm fine." I said, "This is my friend Trish. This is Mel Brooks." She was thrilled about that, And Mel, he said, "Hey, Dreesen, what are you doing Monday?" I said, "What do you want me to do Monday?" He said, "Well, I'm doing a little movie." I said, "I'll do it." He said, "Wait, I didn't even finish. I don't care. What do you want me to do? You want me to sweep the floor? What do you want me to do? I want to be around Mel." Mel said, "Small role." He said, "In blah, blah, blah." I said, I'll do it. He said, it's a one-day shoot. It turned out to be a 2-day shoot where I got killed. The scene.
Yeah.
Hard, and they sprayed shaving cream in my mouth. And
Right.
But it wasn't shaving cream. It was whipped cream. And the problem was it had set too long. And when they did that to me, it was sour. And when I hit the floor, I'm at the floor. They're still rolling. And I'm on the floor. I'm supposed to be dead, but and when Mel yelled cut, I bolted out of them and I got my head in the toilet. He said, "Dreesen, are you okay?" I said, "Mel, what the fuck was in that cake?" Oh, Jesus. So we had
my God.
Sure, but I tell you what, I did 2 nights. I got $4,000 a day. I got $8,000 for doing those 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And this day, now that was almost 35 years ago, I think. Wow. I got on my desk, I probably have a check here for 11 cents. 12 Spaceballs runs over and over and over and over.
Yeah, it's one of those cult classics, man. It's one of those perfect movies, and I remember you seeing it like vividly. So it's crazy, man. I had to ask. You mentioned Jackie Mason earlier. I saw Jackie Mason. It must have been like in New York, but he told a story about Frank Sinatra trying to assassinate him. And I got to ask you if it's true. He apparently Jackie Mason said that he had pissed off. He had Joey Bishop opening for him, and Frank didn't like that Joey wasn't headlining a room. So, and Frank tried to heckle Jackie, and Jackie said that he went back at Frank, and then later he came back to his hotel room, and there was a bullet-shaped hole in his hotel room glass and in the wall, and he thinks Frank tried to have him killed. Do you think that's likely?
It's one of the greatest bullshit stories I've ever. And I'll tell you why. First, by the way, I love Jackie. I thought Jackie was one of the great stand-up comedians of all time.
Mm-hmm.
You know how you're supposed to do, like you got a subject and you do 1 or 2 or 3 jokes on that subject.
Yeah.
Because they say you can't belabor it. Jackie could do 23 jokes on this bottle of water. And when he got done, he had another 20. He was a comedian. But I heard this story from Julie Rizzo.
Oh, okay.
Julie told me what happened was Jackie was doing jokes about when Frank was married to why am I blanking? He was married to Mia Farrow.
Mm-hmm.
Frank was like 50 or something. Mia was 21, 19 or 20 or 21. Frank was married to her for a short time. Jackie was doing routines about the old man and the kid. Frank Sinatra with the kid and blah, 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 blah. And it got back to Frank, but he wasn't mad. He said to Julie, when you see Jackie, ask him not to do that if he doesn't mind not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Julie said, this is Julie's story. He said that he saw Jackie and said, Jackie, Frank wants to know if you won't do a bit, he said, about him being married to a young girl. He said, hey, I tell him what songs to sing. I don't tell him what songs to sing. I don't tell him what songs to sing. He tell me what material to do, blah, blah. And so Julie did not go back and tell Frank, but he's sitting around with a bunch of his friends, some of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys at the table said, hey, this is the way Julie told me the story. He said, I saw Jackie Mason, he's talking about the old man. They call Frank the old man, not like OLD. Aboard ship, the captain of the ship is the OL, the old man. The skipper is always the old man. And so he said, I saw he was talking about the old man the other night and about him being married to the young girl. And Julie said, yeah, I told him that Frank asked him not to do it, but he's continuing to do it, I guess. And the guy said, let me get this straight. You asked him, he said, you asked him not to do it, and he's still doing it.
Right.
A couple nights later, Jackie was sitting in a car and with the window down, and the guy broke broke his jaw, punched him one time, and broke his jaw. Now that's the story Julie told me. So
Wow.
people say to me, "Did Frank Sinatra have Jackie Mason beat up?" I said, "Frank could beat up Jackie Mason. He didn't have to have somebody do it." Well, the other great story is Shecky Green said Frank saved my life. He
I
said,
didn't know that.
"Well, yeah." Shecky Green said, "Hey, 3 guys were beating me up. 3 of 10 guys were beating me up." He said Frank pulled up in a limo and he rolled the window down. And he said, "Okay, he's had enough." He said, "Frank, that's Shecky's story,
Yeah. That's what is there something that in particular like that you miss the most about? I mean, you open for all these guys, you're still friends with some of them, you still talk to some of them, and you were, incredibly close with Frank. You're still doing stand-up, man. You're still out there doing. That's what I love about you, man, is that you still love the craft. You're still doing stand-up. You're still working. But is there something in particular that you miss about that time period, other than your friend? Obviously, you miss Frank Sinatra or whatever. But like, do you miss going out with another performer, going out with on the road with a band, or do you like doing your solo stuff that you're doing now?
Well, I enjoy. I'm doing a one-man show now called An Evening of Laughter, and now I call it The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. I used to call it An Evening of Laughter and Memories of Sinatra, but now I call it The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. It's a 90-minute show where I come out and I do stand-up in theaters for about 25, 30 minutes, and then I segue to a bar. And on stage, there's a bar, and there's a bottle of Jack Daniels, which was Frank's drink of choice. And I segue over to the bar, and I tell a very funny story at the bar, and it gets a big laugh. And when it gets a big laugh, all the lights go out in the theater and on the stage, too. And on the screen is Frank singing. I'm at the bar, and he's singing to me. It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me. So, and I got a little story, I think. So anyhow, when he gets to the chorus, make it one for my baby and one more for the road. He goes off screen, and the spotlight hits me, and now I'm in a bar, and I've come home, and the audience is in a bar with me. And I tell you, the first time I heard that voice, I was 10 years old, shining shoes in a bar in the south side of Chicago, Harvey, Illinois, and he was on the jukebox. And then I take the audience from that little boy hearing Sinatra on the jukebox in Harvey, Illinois, to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So I take them on that journey.
Wow.
And as I'm telling stories, pictures are coming on the screen, authenticating the story I'm telling, or video. So it's a lot of laughs. The Tim and Tom years, I go through all that. The first Tonight Show, what it was like behind that curtain. I go through all that into Sammy Davis, Smokey, but then I get to Frank, and then I get him laughing, and then I get him to the funeral, and I have him in tears, and I turn right around, and I close with a funny monologue and get him laughing again. Because, John, I'll tell you this, I've always thought a good comedian could make you laugh for an hour and a half. A great comedian can make you laugh and cry. And I only see 2 comedians do this. One was Richard Pryor, and the other was Red Skelton. And I thought, wow, I'm going to try that one day, because it's, when we get them on a roll, you don't want to. I saw Richard Pryor take an audience to the ceiling, and then he took them into a real dramatic area and had them, including me, down here. Oh my God, he had the tears coming out of their eyes, and then he turned right around and took them all the way back to killing them again. I said, that's one of the bravest things I've ever seen a comedian do. So that's what I do in my one-man show. And I think, so in answer to your question, I went a long way. But what I missed was the excitement. I can't describe to you what it was like touring with Frank Sinatra. In the almost 14 years I toured with Frank Sinatra, I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in their life. Because, one, I was playing golf on a Celebrity Players Tour, 12 cities a year. I caddied when I was a boy, so I was playing. It was basketball, baseball, football, hockey, tennis, and show business people that were 10 handicap or below. So it was Johnny Bench, Mike Schmidt, Mario Lemieux, John Elway, Dan Marino, Michael Jordan. There was 42 Hall of Famers. Show business, it was me, Jack Wagner, Matt Lauer, Brian Gumbo, Smokey Robinson, Frankie Avalon, Eddie Marinell. I was the only comedian on that tour, so I used to bill myself as the leading money winner among stand-up comedians on the tour, because I was the only one,
Right.
They paid us to play in these cities and then hanging out with these guys. And at the same time, I was touring with Frank. And you're going on it's time to go on the road. A limousine would pull out in front. 2 big guys would come and carry my luggage down to the car. They'd carry me down to the car if I wanted to. Limo would drive me right. I live here in Sherman Oaks, and limo would take us right over to Van Nuys Airport, the private jets. And we'd go right out on the tarmac. I'd get out. They'd load my luggage. I'd walk on the plane. The moment Frank put his foot on that plane, we took off down the runway. Boom. He had a pilot
Wow.
on these spots. He'd say, "Let's go, spots," and we'd down the runway, and we squad cars and limousines. We'd land squad cars and limousines, rush us to the arena. We'd go on stage, do the show. Squad cars and limousines, rush us back to the jet. We were flying over the venue. People weren't even in their cars yet. We were on our way to the next city, doing 5 or 6 cities or 7 in a row. Doing that and playing golf. Christopher Morley once said, "Success is living the life you want." I was on top of the world with that world. That's what I miss. I miss that excitement. And being around Frank Sinatra, it's hard to describe. He'd walk into a room, John. We'd go to a private function. We'd go to the White House. I performed at the White House several times, even before I met Frank and after I met Frank. But, people wanted to be around him.
Yeah.
A room of 1,000 people. Frank would go in the room. He'd be off to the side, some function. Before the night's over, that whole room would gravitate to him, to get around to him. Because not that he commanded it, not that he demanded it, but he was Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
Arguably the greatest pop singer of all time. But forget about that. 1,431 times he went to the studio. He recorded over 100 albums, over 1,200 original songs. He won the Academy Award. He danced with Gene Kelly. There's never been a career like that. And he was a star. Most people are stars 5 years, 10 years, 20. That's a big 60 years.
Yeah.
He sold out in Japan when he was 78 years old. What English singer do you know of that sold out in a foreign country? In Brazil, earlier, before I ever met him, he sold out. 175,000 people came to see him in a huge place. 175,000 people. For a single artist, that's unheard of. So it's hard to describe being around him, what that was like.
Was he kind of forthcoming with you? I mean, he told you that, whatever he told you in that car trip, that he kind of said he was, regretted saying out loud. But was he kind of forthcoming with his politics, with his personal opinions, with his opinions of because how comedians can be appreciative still of other guys that are coming up after them, because it's the comedy. Was he aware of younger musicians and kind of appreciative of what the music was coming up?
Absolutely. And when I got to know, when I first started on tour with him, he was the boss of this tour.
Yeah.
I didn't know how long it was going to last. And the second night I was with him, he took me out to dinner, he and his wife, Barbara. And he said, in the middle of dinner, I can remember like it was yesterday, he set his knife and his fork down. He said, "I like your material and I like your style. I'd like to do a few other dates. I want you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested." Mm-hmm. I didn't let me check my calendar. I said, "Oh yeah, I'll do that." But so he was the boss of the tour. Later, when I started hanging with him, we became like buddies. And toward the end of his life, he was more like a father to me and open up to me more. The more he got to know me and trust me, the more he'd open up. There were times when I was in the car with him in the middle of the night. He would come and get me out of my bungalow when I stayed at his compound. He'd say, "Tommy, let's take a ride." And we'd ride around the desert till dawn. There were times when I was alone with him that he wasn't Frank Sinatra. Mm-hmm. He was a kid from Hoboken, and I was a kid from Harvey, Illinois. And we talked like that. Two street guys. He once told the New York Times guy, and I'll never forget this, and I still have it, and it means the world to me. The guy said, "How come you keep Tom Dreesen with you so long, Frank?" He said, "You mean besides the fact that he's funny?" And the guy said, yeah, besides the fact that he's funny. He said, "Well, if I'm a saloon singer, and I am, then Tommy's a saloon comedian. By that, I mean, we're just a couple of neighborhood guys." And I always treasured that quote.
Wow.
I thought when I was with him alone, we were just a couple of neighborhood guys. And let me say this too, though, John. He never knew how much in awe of him I was, because I never let him see that side. Wow. Was I like anybody else? Holy shit, this was Frank Sinatra. He would do something on stage. I'd want to say to him, "Wow, man, the way you did that house I live in tonight," he'd bring the house down. He had a lot of fans. He had millions of fans. He didn't want another guy gushing over him. So I don't know how I picked up on that. Maybe being a former bartender, I picked up on that. Don't be one of those, And so there were times I want to say, in that movie From Here to Eternity, man, you really got. Then he'd have another slobbering fan by him. I shouldn't say slobbering, but
Yeah.
He didn't. He wanted a friend. He didn't want another fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Was it when the Rat Pack and those guys would kind of hang out? Did you feel like they were all on equal footing? Did one look to the other? Did they more so look to Frank? Did Dean kind of do his own thing? Because there's all those stories about Dean. Nobody could tell Dean what to do. even though, did you ever get involved in any of that? Like kind of see that frustration?
Well, Frank was the chairman of the board. Make no mistake about that. Make no mistake about that. That they knew Dean and Sammy had tremendous respect for him. But I played golf with Dean. I did the Dean Martin roast. I did some gigs with Dean and got to know him. And in fact, his family and I are still real close.
Nice.
His son Craig and his daughter Gail. I introduced her to her husband.
Oh wow.
And Dina. But anyhow, Dean was somebody you didn't fool with. One of the reasons that Frank loved Dean Martin, one was Dean could make you laugh. Dean, you could spend a day with him. He wouldn't say one word, but at the end of the day, he'd say one sentence, and you'd fall off the chair. Remind me if I get past this to tell you how Dean made Frank laugh one time. Remind me, but
Will do.
Come go with this. Frank loved Dean Martin because I think Dean was the brother Frank never had. Frank was an only child, and Dean was funny. And Frank wasn't. Frank would try to tell a joke, but he wasn't a funny guy. And I think he did that about Dean, because Dean was so glib. But the other thing was, Dean was a tough son of a bitch. Dean boxed when he was grew up in Woodville under the name of Kid Crochetti. That was Crochetti. And you didn't fool with him. Hey, a mob guy reached over his shoulder one night to take a shrimp. Johnny Rosselli from Florida. Dean was eating shrimp. And a mob guy reached over the table to grab a shrimp, and Dean slapped his hand. Said, "I don't like people fooling with my food." I mean, there's a book by a guy named Romer, Roemer. He was head of the FBI. He talks about the wiretaps they had, where Sam Giancana was talking to Johnny Rosselli, and Johnny Rosselli told Sam Giancana he wanted to kill Dean.
Wow. He
said, because he has no respect for me. He said he'd like to break his jaw. And I said to myself, well, Johnny, you better come with some help, because Dean was a pushover. And Frank knew that. I think he respected Dean the most for that. I grew up, again, I boxed when I was in the service, and I grew up on the streets. There's guys who in bars are ambushers. You have a few arguments with them. They wait till you turn your head and they ambush you, or something like that. Or they have, Frank was more like, he was a scrapper. He might throw a punch at you or something like that. But Dean was a fighter. And Frank had that kind of respect for him. But they, in turn, had the respect for Frank as being the greatest pop singer of all time. Steve Lawrence once said to Frank Sinatra, we were having dinner, and he said, you ruined it for all the rest of us. That's what he said. He said, when they heard you sing it, they knew how it was supposed to be sung.
Wow. That's a great compliment.
Now, another story here about how Dean made
Frank laugh.
Toward the end of Frank's career, he was using the teleprompters a lot. Because he would forget lyrics, and so now he would do the same 17 songs every night. But he started putting in the teleprompters, and he was bringing in new songs, "Moonlight in Vermont." And even though he didn't need them some nights he could do the song, but just knowing they were there, the lyrics were there, comforted him.
Yeah. Dean
was forgetting lyrics to songs in Vegas and everything, and Frank was talking to him all the time. They called each other Deg. He said, "Hey, Deg," in short for Dago. And I was telling a story in a radio show one time, and the guy said, "Boy, they couldn't get away with that today." I said, "What do you mean?" "I mean, calling each other Deg. They couldn't get away with that today." I said, "I would love to be in a room, and I'd hope it'd be on like the 21st floor. And when you were telling Dean, the person would come and tell Dean and Frank, you can't call each other Deg. Open the window, somebody's going out that window." It says bullshit. You tell these guys, they called each other affectionately Deg.
Yeah.
So so he says Frank was trying to get Dean to do this, to get the teleprompters in, and he wasn't doing it, and he was forgetting lyrics. Anyhow, we were in Detroit, Frank and I, doing the Fox Theater and matinee, and then we were doing an evening show, and then we were flying out. So in between shows, we were watching football. Frank and I were in the suite watching football, and in came Frank's manager, Elliot Weissman. And he said, "I got Mort Viner on the phone." That was Dean Martin's manager. He said, "I got Mort on the phone." And Mort says that Dean used the teleprompters last night in Vegas. And he walked off stage and said, "Book me on a world tour. These things are wonderful." These things. He said, damn it. I've been telling that. Get him on the phone. I've been telling him that for what the hell? He gets Dean on the phone, and he said, "Hey, Dave, I've been telling you for years, those rock stars, they put that button in their ear, the lyrics in it." He said, "We're not getting any younger, and I've been telling you, and you're finally," and Dean's listening. He goes, yeah. Dean said, "Where are you at?" where you guys at? And Frank said, hold on 1 second. He said, Tommy, where are we at? I said, we're in Detroit. He said, we're in Detroit. Dean said, did you have to look in the fucking teleprompter to find where you were at? The phone on the floor. He said, he got me again. He got me again.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great, man. Yeah, I think when I didn't realize it at the time, but I think you don't realize that how funny Dean was. Like when I was a kid, it was always Jerry Lewis for me. Like Jerry Lewis is the funny one or whatever. And then as I got older, you realize how fucking good Dean was and how funny he was and just a perfect straight man. But then also when he was by himself, man, could deliver a line, a quip, a note, you know, the physicality of it, everything. Like he was very, very funny.
You remember the comedy team, Rowan and Martin?
Oh, yeah.
Dick Martin went to his grave saying Dean Martin was the most underrated comedian of all time because everybody thought he said he was funny. You know, I was with a comedy team for 6 years, as you know, as we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jerry Lewis, Dean was a quarterback. Jerry would go all over the place and be funny all of it. And Dean knew when to bring him in, knew when to bring him back here. To he was brilliant at that. You know, at his own. He was a funny guy. I mean, you know, but again, he wasn't like me. You know, I'm a talker. Dean was a very funny guy, but he could also be very funny.
Did you know when Frank was going to when he was going to bring Jerry on to, when he was going to bring Dean onto the telethon?
No.
You didn't know?
That was the biggest surprise of all and one of the greatest moments in show business, I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, for young people today wouldn't understand, but Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, when they got hot, they could have, today, they'd fill Dodger Stadium. If today, you know, that they in 6 weeks that happened.
Wow.
In 6 weeks at the Skinny's Club, the 500 Club, Skinny D'Amato owned it in Atlantic City. You know, and they got people to come there and got there, and before you know it, they were the hottest. And those days, a Catholic and a Jew, people thought that was whoa, oh my God! You mean to tell me they're a team? You know, but it was amazing. And Jerry. Dean didn't talk to me a lot about that, but Jerry did. Jerry opened up to me a lot because I was with a comedy team. I would talk to Jerry a lot about timing and team and all that kind of stuff. After he never saw Tim and Tom, and I met him after I was Tim and Tom, but I was interested in comedy teams. But Jerry talked a lot about it. Dean's side of the story was different than Jerry's, of course.
Sure. Yeah. And did you know? Did they actually, you know, communicate, talk more than anything else? You know what I mean? Like, were they really kind of like, because I know towards the end, I've had friends who know Jerry and stuff like that, and they've, you know, they talk about their relationship a little bit. Were you around them at the time when they were older, when they were kind of, you know, patching things up?
Yeah, not together. They hardly got together after that night. I think they might have seen each other one other time. One other time in person? I mean, it just wasn't something Dean, by the way, was a recluse. I mean, a recluse. He stayed because of his kids, right? He was a loner. I would go see him. There was a place called La Familia in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And not Hollywood, I'm sorry, in Beverly Hills. And Dennis Farina and I, Dennis who loved Dean Martin, you know, and Dennis Farina, I would go over there sometimes. La Familia, we'd go over there, have something, and Dean would be in the corner. I'd send a drink over to him. He'd send a drink back, but he wanted to be alone. He wanted to be left alone. But he would comment to me. I'd be up at the bar, like with Dennis, waiting for our table, and Dean would say, "Hey, Tommy, I spent 4 hours in the shower today." I said, "You did?" He said, "Yeah, tomorrow I'm going to turn the water on." You know, he'd do stuff like that, you know. That's great, man. I want to talk to you about your new book. What was it when you started to write this book, man? How was it kind of diving into those memories? Were you like, you know, was it hard going back through all of it? Did you enjoy it? Was there any point where you were like, you know, had to kind of stop and collect your thoughts and be like, man, this is heavy stuff? Yeah, you know, because I wanted to tell the truth. You know, also, see, what happened was I had been saving. I got the thing right here. It says stories of my life. Wow. You know, in my words. And these were the stories that I journaled night after night, year after year, you know. And I had it all done. And I started thinking, I want to write something for my grandchildren that one day their children are going to say, "What was your grandpa like?" And I wanted to leave a book. So that was part of it. And then two guys called me, Darren Grubb and Johnny Russo, called me. They said, they got a hold of my number and they said, "Mr. Dreesen, we would like to write a book about you. We think it would be interesting." And I said, "Guys, I've already written the book, but I could sure use you for the narrative and help me, But and they were brilliant at it. So I would send them chapters, and then they would come back and they'd say, "Okay, we're going to take this sentence out and put it in chapter 4 because it'll help, blah blah blah." About
right.
It. But when I got the book, when it was finally done, and I got the first manuscript, I read it. It was really interesting to go down memory lane and think. It's almost sometimes like Frank Sinatra's lyric to think I did all that. I forgot, not forgot, but I ran 26 miles 3 years in a row for multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
When I found out that my real father was Frank Polizzi, my mother's brother-in-law, that's how I was Italian. When I confronted him, and I put in the book, that was a moment that I had to relive. Then on his deathbed, I promised him, because he had a band at one time called Frank Polizzi and the Venetianeers, and in fact, my mom sang in the band sometimes, that he was like in show business on a small scale, but he loved entertainers. And I told him on his deathbed that one day I would receive an award and I would accept it in his name. And so I received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor award, and that's where he came from, Italy, on Ellis Island when he was 7 years old, and I accepted it in his name. I had to relive all those things and the pain of these things, and the joys. So yeah, it was. And then when you look at it and say, "I wish I would have put this in. I wish I'd have put that in."
Yeah. That's the hard thing, is going back through it and going, "Oh man, I left this." But you know what? Then there's the paperback. So you slip those stories into the paperback edition. No one knows the difference, and that's it. You call it a bonus. You hike up the price.
Yeah, the paperback's already out, and I haven't done that. But
or I mean, there's always a part 2. That's it.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever want to go with that. But it was yeah. It's inside every stand-up comedian. There's a one-man show and there's a book. And I tell stand-up comics this all the time. You can work comedy clubs till the cows come home, and you're going to probably make rent money, and you may or may not survive a lot. But theaters are all over the United States, and I mean state-of-the-art theaters.
Right.
I performed in a high school in Frankfort, Illinois, that had 870 seats, state-of-the-art, like on Broadway. It had 810 seats, but we ended up putting 870, and it was the community went to that theater.
Mm-hmm.
But there are theaters all over the country, that 5 or 6 in Kansas City, where you don't have waiters and waitresses roaming. They get their drinks before they come, and they sit down, and they're right there in the palm of your hand.
Yeah.
A story to tell, how you got in the show. Your mom and dad are different, but there's never been anybody like you, John, on this.
Mm-hmm.
No one had your same parents. No one had. You're like the snowflake. There's none two snowflakes alike. So every time you go on stage, you're going to tell a story that they couldn't possibly tell. So, and you can turn that into a journey. You do your stand-up, but then you take them on this journey, how you came to this moment, and what was the highlights, some of the lowlights. Anyhow.
It's a great point, man. I mean, I never thoroughly thought of it that way. And I know one of my friends is watching, and I know he's working on a one-man show too. And I bet he took that to heart. So that's great to hear.
Well, tell him that if he wants to call me anytime, you'll have my number. Bill has my number. I'll be glad to.
I absolutely will. That's great, man. Thank you. And I want to, thanks for staying as long as you have, man. I kept you in a half an hour longer than I said I was going to. So I appreciate that. I got to ask you the big 3 questions that we ask every guest that's been on the show. You ready?
Sure.
Okay. First question is, if you can go back in time and talk to your younger self, what piece of advice would you give yourself that would help you today?
It would be, I hope that you would have been a better father than what you were. I mean, I love my children, and my children love me, and they'll tell you I'm a great guy. But this career, that I chose this career of stand-up comedy, it took me away from them time after time after time. You miss birthdays and you miss graduations because you're trying to get the rent money. You're trying to, and your justification for that is, oh, well, if I make it, I can do things for them that I didn't have as a child. But the truth is, it's a very selfish endeavor. It's a very selfish endeavor. You're chasing your dream, and you drag them along with you. I'd have been a better father. Yeah.
Wow.
And today, my kids say things about me, but I know in my heart, and every comedian out there knows that we chased a dream and we drug them along with us, and that has some consequences.
That I feel it's funny that you say that because I know I hope you believe your kids when they tell you that if they how all the nice things they say about you, and that they had a good childhood or a good life because my mom's not a performer, but my mom I know she feels the same way because my dad wasn't the greatest guy and there was some stuff, but I know that every now and again when we do talk about stuff, she'll say, she regrets things and that she'll talk about my childhood, whatever. And I always say the same thing. I always say, I only remember the good times. I only, I appreciate this, and this, and I love you and yada, yada. So I hope you do believe your kids because I hope my mom believes me when I say the same thing. So I hope you do take it to heart and don't be too, hard on yourself either.
Well, as most of us are comedians, I'm my worst critic, and
yeah,
I don't need to read what the critics think of me. That's
absolutely
how you become better is when you accept those. Constructive criticism will never hurt you in show business.
Absolutely.
If you don't know, you can't grow.
Absolutely, man. Completely agree.
What's number?
So number 2 is what had to end in your life, good or bad, that led you exactly to where you are today?
Drinking.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No doubt about it. I love beer. I never drank anything but beer. I love hanging out with the guys, drinking, going to ball games. I drank, I love drinking beer. And I think about it even to this day. But I know that my father was a beer alcoholic, and so was my mom at one time. And that's all they drink was beer. But I know that I would not been able to go on stages in front of 20,000 people or 40,
right.
Like I said, with in Hawaii, with a hangover. I know I couldn't have written the material that I had to write with a hangover. I couldn't have been sharp and, catching planes, doing shows at 2:00 in the morning, catching a 6 o'clock flight. You know what I'm saying? With hangovers, it was bad enough without hangovers, but
right.
No doubt in my mind, drinking had to stop.
Nice. Did you? It's so crazy because a lot of performers, I have a lot of bands, musicians, and stuff like that, and comedians, obviously, on the show, and that's a common theme among all of us. Did you link it to creativity ever? Did you feel like if you stopped, maybe you wouldn't have been as loose or funny or creative?
No, not at all. But
that's great.
George Carlin told me that he smoked dope for 7 years, and he said, I thought I was being very creative. He said, when I quit smoking grass and I look back over my life, I go, holy shit, I wrote that crap. He said he thought he was being more creative. The interesting thing in the Comedy Store days when I was starting out, there was maybe 100 comedians there, and cocaine was the big thing. Quaaludes and cocaine. There were 3 comics who weren't doing drugs: David Letterman, Jay Leno, and me. And we're all still here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. And the last question has to do with the show. It ties in with the dystopia theme. If this was the last day on Earth for everybody, and it was a true dystopia, either aliens or zombies or a comet heading toward Earth or climate change hits, how would you spend your last day? How would you want to go out?
I would want all my children, my grandchildren around me. I'd want to calm them and comfort them and tell them we're going to a better place and I'm going with you.
Nice.
That's what and I tell them that now when I go, don't fear death because I'll be waiting on the other side for you. That light at the end of the tunnel, it'll be me saying, come on, it's your time, or it's not your time, one or the other.
Beautiful. I have an additional question to that one. What would be the last joke you think you would tell? Do you have one of your favorites?
Yeah.
I saw that look.
I have 18,000 jokes in my brain, but when you said that, I was going to come up with some like, why did the chicken cross the street?
Or like the dirtiest joke imaginable that you shouldn't be telling at the last moment.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I've done a stag. I got to tell you a funny Sam Kinison story. Sam's 3 weeks before he died, he was getting on a plane, and American Airlines, as I was too, and we saw each other as we were boarding, and we were going. He said, "Hey Tom, you know what?" He said, "You're from Illinois, and I'm from Illinois." He said, "You're a comedian, and I'm a comedian." He said, "But Tom, you got this terrible reputation of being a clean comedian, and it's ruining your fucking career."
Oh, that's great.
I said, "Oh, you got it, Sam." So But my point is, I could do a stag roast with the best of them.
Yeah.
I can do a stag roast. I'm a street guy. But
Right.
in my day, you couldn't make money. We were in show business, show and business.
Right.
And how do you make it? You had to get on a Tonight Show. How do you get on a Tonight Show? You had the right material that can make grandma and grandpa, mom, and the kids laugh.
Yeah.
So it was a business move. But I could.
Right.
And I'll tell you one other quick story. I'm at the Laugh Factory a while back, and I was getting ready to try some new material, and there were two comedians off to the left, and I couldn't see them, and they couldn't see me. And I was my notes, and one of them said, Tom Dreesen's here, and I my name, my ears perked up, and one of the other comedians said, yeah, he's old school. And the other comedian said, what do you mean he's old school? He said, well, he doesn't use the F word. And the other comedian said, he doesn't use the F word. What does he use for adjectives? I stuck my head around the corner and I said, adjectives. What I use for adjectives.
That's great. What do you think? I gotta ask you one more question. What do you think of the comedy documentaries? Are you watching that kind of stuff? Because you knew all these guys. I was just at the premiere of the Carlin documentary that Judd Apatow did last night. But there's like that one, Gary Shandling's documentary that Judd did, that one too. And Robin Williams documentary that came out, I think, like 6 months ago or something like that. Yeah. What do you watch those? Because you knew all those guys. Like, do you?
I do, and by the way, they're doing a documentary on my life from this.
I know, and that's another thing too. How involved? Like, do you when they're doing the one on your life? Are you involved every step of the way, or do you have to let go of the reins?
No, I. By the way, that's part of the deal that I wanted to be involved, because I don't like even my book. I don't want anybody ever to come up to me and said, I read in your book, and I'd say, I didn't say that.
Right.
Bullshit. I said it. So I wanted to make sure every line in that book, I'll stand by everything I said. Some things I said in that book are painful, and some things, but that's the way it happened.
Yeah.
But in the same way with a documentary, I don't want you to sugarcoat me either. I'm like,
sure.
I mean, God knows, man. I've done some bad things in my life, and I've learned from them. It's been a struggle my whole life. And it's like the first half of my life is God said, I'm going to put a load on you. But if you survive, the second half is on me. And the second and on him. I've had a great second half.
Nice, man. Are you like when they're doing that stuff, for the documentary, are you in control of all of your media, all the rights to the footage and stuff like that?
So far, I've given them all. They'll be, because I did like 50 David Letterman shows. I hosted.
Yeah.
There's, the Tonight shows. They're going to have to get clearance, on some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've also, everything I have, I've given to them, and we get together all the time and talk about, the way I would view, and I'm not making this up, John. If I close my eyes, no matter where I was, performing at the White House, performing with Frank Sinatra, performing all over the world, the Tonight shows, the Letterman show, no matter where I'm at, no matter this where I've gotten to a big place in comedy, if I close my eyes, I see a little boy with a shoe shine box, trudging through the snow, going tavern to tavern, trying to get enough money to feed his brothers and sisters. I'm that little boy. That little boy stayed with me and is with me my whole life. There were times I had to tell that little boy, okay, I got to do an adult job now. I got to.
Yeah.
There's a great book called Healing the Child Within that I read years ago. 2 women wrote it. It's really good. But anyhow, I'm not far from that little boy. That's who I am. I'm a neighborhood guy, and that's what I want the documentary to be. I remember I wrote a movie years ago called 7 Come 11, and it didn't happen. But it was about 6 guys from the neighborhood, 7 guys actually from the neighborhood, who all had dreams. They were going to play in the major leagues. They were going to do this. They all had dreams. They grew up together, went to first grade together, and all these 7 guys had dreams. And one day, they realized my dream is never going to come true. Every one of them had a different dream.
Wow.
In fact, not only am I never going to play in the big leagues, never ever going to own my own company or my whatever, I'm not even going to be able to leave this neighborhood. And I want this documentary about the one guy. I left that neighborhood.
Yeah. It's a great title for the documentary. Yeah. Beautiful, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Hang backstage just 2 seconds. I'm going to wrap up and then I'll see you backstage.
Okay, buddy.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you coming on. Really do.
We enjoyed this, and I hope we work together somewhere down the line.
I hope we do too, man. That would be a phenomenal. Anytime you want me anywhere, I will be there, and I'll dress nicely.
No, don't worry. I like the way you're dressed now.
Thank you.
Dystopia tonight.